Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have a very special event for you here tonight. I'm Richard Litov. I'm the president of the Freedom Heritage Museum. The Freedom Heritage Museum has been established in 2012. We've had various events. This last summer, we coordinated the D-Day reenactment, 70th anniversary. We had a hanger dance, other things going on. We are going to be out at the Evansville airport. We're in the process of signing a lease, because that's going to be our home, because we have aircraft that flies. We already have the advanced trainer during World War II that all the pilots learned before they went into their fighter planes or bombers. We already have other artifacts from the P47s, an engine, other things. Check out our website. We've got some brochures out there on the Freedom Heritage Museum, but also check out freedomheritagemuseum.org. I'd first like to start off with giving you a little bit of introduction. We've got a short video that tells about Evansville during the war years, World War II, because that's what this museum is all about. This is the time that Evansville and this tri-state really stepped up and historically had the biggest impact on national events and world events. We were the largest producer of war goods per capita in the country, producing over 300 items. Everyone knows about the LSD ships at the shipyards that were made. The P47 Thunderbolts, over 6,000 have made at Republic Aviation south end of the airport. But we made munitions, refurbished Sherman tanks, made uniforms, etc. It's a proud heritage, and we need to remember that, and particularly the greatest generation. So here's a little introduction about Evansville and the Freedom Heritage Museum.
Never before and never since has one community pulled together, endured rationing, and made so many personal sacrifices as the people of Evansville, Indiana during World War II. This is a story of how we became the most productive manufacturing city in the world per capita. It's an incredible show of support by providing an overwhelming amount of supplies to Allied forces on the front lines. Our world today may very well have become a very different place without the citizens of Evansville. Our community was transformed. World events were changed. During the years of 1941 through 1945, Evansville became a major center of industrial production. City employment quickly jumped from 18,000 to 80,000. People moved or commuted into the city from all over the tri-state area to work in the home front war effort. In fact, the influx helped wipe out the lingering effects of the Great Depression. A massive shipyard complex was built on the Ohio River waterfront to produce landing ship tanks, and Evansville became the largest inland producer of those ships, with 20,000 workers. The Chrysler Automobile Factory was converted into an ordnance plant, turning out bullets by the billions, using 13,000 workers. Existing companies and new companies switched over to manufacturing war materials. Republic Aviation Farmingdale, New York, built a new factory in a field adjacent to the airport. They built over 6,000 P-47 Thunderbolt fighter aircraft that were critical to the success of the Normandy invasion and the Battle of the Bulge. Briggs, Indiana produced aircraft wings for the Navy F-4U Corsair, PBY Catalina, F-4F Wildcat, and the F-6F Hellcat, all of which contributed to the success of the South Pacific. Evansville had more than 30,000 aircraft workers. Hometown heroes produced more than 300 different products. They manufactured them by the millions. They shaped America's future freedoms. There are stories to tell, To preserve for today's and tomorrow's generation, it is time to record the next dynamic chapter. We invite this community to come together once again 7 decades later to create the Freedom Heritage Museum at Hangar 1 at the Evansville Regional Airport. Our mission is to collect, preserve, and make accessible the objects produced and the personal accounts of our local home front and veteran heroes of World War II, so that future generations become educated about their efforts and sacrifices, and that we remember and honor them for protecting the freedoms that we have today. We must raise a total of $7 million to make the Freedom Heritage Museum a reality. Visitors to the Freedom Heritage Museum will view live demonstrations of airplanes, military vehicles, and production equipment. We will recreate what it was like to train for combat, fly a mission in a P47, fight in a tank battle, and produce supplies on short order. We will listen to personal stories of local veterans and home front workers and view 3D programs of the manufacturing at Republic Aviation, at the shipyard, and the Chrysler factory. Your sponsorship support is essential. From individuals, corporations, and foundations, your gifts will bestow many benefits to the community. The museum adds to our destination's appeal for tourism and travel. Your gift means celebrating Evansville's efficiency, ingenuity, and dedication to hard work. Being a sponsor will allow you to honor the greatest generation. You have the opportunity for designating name rights to facilities, major exhibits, grounds, and classrooms. You will have the satisfaction that you have helped to honor our hometown heroes. We hope that you will join us in this effort and make the museum a reality. They are our grandparents, parents, friends, and neighbors. Discover, learn, remember, and honor our hometown heroes that changed the world and protected our freedoms.
Very nice.
Now for the best part. I want to introduce you to 3 P47 pilots. Today has been a reunion. This is very special. I have on my right Alan Sanderson. He's from Evansville. He flew 119 combat missions in the European theater. He's with the 57th Fighter Group. Next to him is, in the middle is Raymond Schureck of Owensboro. He flew 89 combat missions, European theater, with the 371st Fighter Group. And then to my right immediately is Jerry Wurmser from Lexington. He flew 66 missions with the 324th Fighter Group. And this is a special reunion because before today, these 3 gentlemen had not met each other before. They had the opportunity to spend some time reminiscing what it was like to be P47 pilots. And we want to share that experience with you here tonight. So we're going to have a conversation with 3 very important P47 pilots. And of course, we have quite a heritage here in Evansville, having produced over 6,000 of those P47 aircraft. And to start off with, of course, World War II started with a bang for the United States. It was December 7th, 1941. All of a sudden, we're at war. These gentlemen were about 17 at the time, and I'd like to ask you, when you first heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor, how did you think it might affect your life?
Well, I was at a picture show like I say, I was in a picture show in Louisville on Sunday afternoon. And in fact, I remember her name was Lucille. We came out of the movie and the newsboys were hollering extra, extra, Pearl Harbor attack. Well, we didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. And, so anyway, the next morning, I was attending University of Louisville at the time because I wanted to join the Air Force. And at peacetime, they wanted 2 years of college before, required to join. So I was at university to get my 2 years of college in. And let me think a minute. The next morning, I went over to this girl's house. It was near the University of Louisville, and we listened to the radio when President Roosevelt said something about this is a day that will live in infamy, and that Pearl Harbor was attacked and so on. And so I really first went down to join the Marines, but the line was awfully long. When I did finally get in there, I weighed about 140. I jumped on a scale and the thing didn't even stop. And the fellow said 170. The guy wrote it down. And he said 6'1" or something. I'm 5'8". So anyway, I didn't end up joining that day. But the following September, that was in December '44. The following September, I did join the Air Force, and we had to join the reserve. And then when there was an opening in a flying school, or after they checked you out, or whatever, my father was in Germany, so they probably did a whole lot of checking on me. And they didn't call me to active duty until the following March. And then I went to San Antonio and pre-flight school, and then primary, basic, and advanced, graduated, became an instructor for 3 months. Next thing I knew, I was on my way to France.
Well, I went through about the same procedure that Jerry went through. I was listening to the radio, a football game, and they broke into the broadcast and said they had reports of Pearl Harbor being bombed. Well, I was just out of high school, and we'd studied a little bit about Pearl Harbor, but the rest of the family didn't know what Pearl Harbor was. But anyhow, the draft had started, I think, maybe a year before. One of my brothers had already been drafted. And we got the message pretty quick that this was a serious situation. And one thing it meant for me, I had applied for a job over in Charleston in a gunpowder bag loading plant. And I figured that would get me the job, and sure enough, I got the job over there. But in about 7 months, I was called, volunteered. I realized I was going to be called. Volunteered, and I went through the same procedure that Jerry went through. I fought in France and Germany just like Jerry. Fought until the end of the war, and stayed in about a year after the end of the war, and then was discharged.
Alan, tell us. Alan, tell us why you became a pilot. Why were you interested in flying, and how did you get into the Army Air Corps?
Well, I really didn't have any interest in flying at all, except at the local airport. We used to go out there and see them when they come in and do these demos. But Sunday afternoon, the day of Pearl Harbor, I had a date and her name was Julia. Sorry, Nancy.
His wife is here.
But we heard the news and never thought much about it until the next week. And the more I thought about it, the more I worried about it. At the time, I was already enrolled to go to Virginia Tech. I was living in Virginia. So I changed my mind, and in May, I joined the Air Corps. It was called the Army Air Corps. And I waited and waited and waited. Had a good time. Went down to Virginia Beach, waiting on the call, you know, had a good time. Finally, in November, they called me. Sent me to Nashville boot camp. Then from there, we went to the various flying schools. Montgomery, Alabama, to pre-flight school, which really was the equivalent of a couple of years of college, because all we did was go to school from 8 until 5 every day except Sunday. And then after that, we went through the flying primary, basic, advanced training. Had some P-40 time and went to Florida and checked out the P-47. Had about, I guess about 20 hours, 25 hours, and they shipped me overseas. So it was pretty quick. By the end of, it was November 43, I was overseas. Joined up with them over there.
Jerry, tell us what was the most difficult way of transitioning from those training aircraft to the P-47 Thunderbolt?
Oh, it's simple. In the training aircraft, there was an instructor sitting behind. Primary flight school was 125 horsepower, I think. In basic, we stepped up to 450, and then in advanced, an AT-6 was about 600 or 650, I don't remember. But you always had an instructor with you for the first several hours. So when you got to the P-40, we didn't have an instructor. But I remember it wasn't hard to fly, but the P-47, the instructor stood on the wing outside and said, well, be sure and remember this, and be sure to do that, and remember how you recovered from a spin. Well, forget that. The way you learn for 7 or 8 months how to recover from a spin, that doesn't work on this plane. And when that was over, he said, good luck. He jumped down off the wing and told you to go. This P-47, 2,000 horsepower, they even had a wire halfway across on the quadrant, didn't they? Have it blocked off. You couldn't open it all the way. And half was enough to take off. Of course, when you had a couple of bombs and full tank of gas, you pushed it against the fire all the way as far as it would go front to take off. But that first flight was quite thrilling, and they told you, you know, he's not there with you. So they tell you to go up and fly around and put your flaps down and put your wheels down and do these things and try not to get in a spin, which I did get in a spin, but it came out real nice, you know. That's about it. I know you had to keep above 150 miles of indicated airspeed to make that last turn to line up with the runway, which that was quite a bit more than, well, the other planes that we flew wouldn't even go that fast.
Raymond, what are the type of skills that really were required and really made the cut for the P-47 pilots in order to fly the P-47?
Good eyesight, I suppose, was one of the main requirements, and then coordination was very important. Depth of perception was very important, and good judgment. And of course, training. We had the best training in the world. The Army taught us how to fly, and the remember my first flight well. The feeling of power that being able to toss that 7-ton airplane around was pretty satisfying. But the landing was an adventure. This was in Richmond, Virginia, and the runway had an emergency extension on it, thank goodness. For some reason, they had a soldier out there carrying a rifle. I don't know what he was guarding, but anyhow, he was on the runway. And I used up that emergency extension, and I remember seeing him run for his life. Training was an adventure, all right.
Alan, what was it like when you finally got your wings, and how did you celebrate completing your training before they sent you overseas?
How did I celebrate? Well, I'll tell you the truth. I got in a car with a friend of mine who graduated at the same time, drove to Chattanooga, met my future wife. We got married the next morning.
Jerry, tell us about what was the camaraderie like amongst the training cadets, and also once you got to your first air base, and where did you go for your first assignments?
First assignment overseas. Well, your camaraderie, you're going to fly together, you're in separate planes, and you can talk to each other, and you're going to try and protect each other. And I went overseas, there was 14 of us, and you felt like they were closer than your brother, at least I did. And most of the 14 I went over with got killed over there. And one boy named Norman Robita, who was studying to be a priest, he got his first orientation flight in. We all had to go around with our skipper to see some checkpoints and where the Rhine River was and things like that. And he had to get that hour's flight in chasing your commanding officer around the sky. You want to see if you could fly. And he got his hour in first, and he went on a mission while the rest of us were still getting our orientation in. He got killed on his very first mission, which was quite a shock to the rest of us because we thought it was a big adventure and all. Like getting off the ship in Italy, when we came over, saw a little kid run up, little 10 or 12-year-old kid run up and grab something out of your backpack. And an MP, 6-foot MP, hit him with a belly and knocked him down. You thought, man, what am I getting myself into over there? So it was pretty shocking.
Raymond, what was your first mission like, and how did you feel, and how did you get prepared for it overseas?
Well, of course, getting prepared, all of my training was geared for that. And the first mission, I was excited. But I made several mistakes. We had a radio that had 4 channels on it. And one channel was for ground control, another was for operation. A third was for combat area, and then the fourth was for emergency use only. And at the flight leader's orders, we'd switch from one channel to another. And I missed his order to switch when we went into the combat area. And all of a sudden, my leader, I was number 2 man, my leader dove down on the target, and I wasn't prepared. And I had that old plane, which you had to reach down behind you to arm the bomb, and then another alone in the air looking like a dummy, which I was. And finally another pilot, an experienced pilot, came along and laid me down onto the target. And I got home all right, but I was very, very embarrassed. I wish you hadn't asked me this question.
Well, we have to ask you, Alan, what was it like on your first mission? How did you get prepared and what happened?
Well, I don't know about preparation, but it was pretty antagonizing to sit on the end of that runway and think, where am I going from here? And the first mission wasn't too bad. We did some strafing, some bombing. This was off of the coast of the west coast, or the east coast of Italy. And I think we did pretty well by our target. And I came back feeling pretty enthused about it, really. A whole lot better than I did when I started. But it was one of those things that you just did it.
So about how many missions did it take before you really felt comfortable and confident in handling the aircraft in combat conditions?
Comfortable. Oh, maybe 5 or 6 missions. What was the second one? No. Comfortable in what?
Confident.
Confident. Probably took a little longer than that. Yeah, you finally become acclimated and you feel like this is part of it. It's like driving an automobile or anything else. It's just part of it. It comes natural. And unless you have a real problem. But worked out pretty well.
Jerry, during World War II, a lot of aircraft had nose art or names on the aircraft. Did you have any nose art or a name for your P47?
Well, when it was given to me, it had the name on it of Black Sheep, and I didn't get the name. And this plane had been crashed, landed after it had been shot down, the pilot was flying it out of England, and they rebuilt it, not too good either, and gave it to me. And out of my 66 missions, I flew it less than a dozen times. It was always in the shop. And there was a form you had to sign when you landed the plane. If there's anything wrong with it, you write it down. And then you couldn't fly it until that was fixed. And in mine, in that form, it said the tail was empennage, was what they call it, the whole tail assembly, was twisted 2 degrees out of line, and this didn't work, and that didn't work. And to fly it, you had to sign this thing, they call it an exceptional release. Yes, I know that this is wrong with it, but I'm gonna fly it anyway. So mostly I flew somebody else's. Something he said reminded me of, if I hadn't even forgot it already. Oh yeah, I know what it was. I don't remember now, but I think it was around my 9th or 10th mission. We had a captain who had been an infantry officer, and he went to flying school just like the cadets. We had a captain and a first lieutenant, but both were infantry officers. And Captain Kantz, he was new and he didn't have much experience in the P47. And we were at, I don't remember, Dole or Bourneville, France. And the engineers had come out and graded out a piece of land and laid down a metal strip. And that was the runway. And then come January or February of 45, there was a warm spell, and that runway buckled. And it went up like this and then down like that. You had to have, as I recall, 105 miles an hour to get off the ground, did you? And so he's running, he was number 2 man. I was about number 11 or 12. I was the last way back. And he ran down that runway. The first man was off, the leader. Captain Cass went down the runway, and he wasn't going fast enough when he went over that rise, and he went up in the air a little bit. And he came back down, those 2 bombs went off, and that was the end of the airplane. And a fellow named Dick Trice from Louisville, Kentucky, where I was from, I was flying his wing, because he'd been over, we graduated at the same time, but he went directly overseas, and I didn't come over till 3 or 4 months later. He already had 30 missions, and en route to his 100s to go home. So I was flying his wing. So the number 2, the fellow with the microphone at the end of the runway said, "Number 3, you're clear to go. He's off the runway," or something like that. So the 3rd man took off, and the 4th man took off. And all you had to do was hold a stick forward a little bit as you went over that to stay on the runway until you got enough speed. And when Dick Trice pulled out, one of his buddies, I never will forget it, he said, "Hey Dick," he said, "you think you'll make it?" And he came back on a radio, and you could hear his teeth chattering. His plane was number 77. He said, "Oh, 77 will make it." And he took off, and 17 seconds later, I pulled in behind him, and I took off. Wide open, and through the gate, hit the water. Get all the speed you could get. That was war emergency power. You weren't supposed to use that unless you were in a dogfight.
Raymond, tell us about how many different P47s did you fly, and did they have any names or nose art on them?
Yes, I had 4 planes total. The first one is called, Jerry. The first 3 were hand-me-down planes. The first one was Blackjack II, and it had a picture of I think it was the Jack of Spades on there. I forgot the second plane's name. The 3rd one was named Miss Washington Lee, the pilot. I was engaged to a girl from Washington, and that's the plane I left on the hillside over in Germany. And then the 4th plane I got was brand new, I got to name it. Had its first flight, and I named it Dirty Red. Some of the fellows in my training class called me Dirty Red. Well, if I ever get a plane, that's what I'm going to name it. They said since I was from Kentucky and I was sort of allergic to bass, that's why they called me Dirty Red. But my wife never let me forget that I didn't name my plane after her. I flew that plane to the end of the war then, and I've always been kind of sentimental about it. About 2 years after the war, I ran into an old buddy that was over in Germany, and he said he saw my plane over there sitting in a field with about 100 other planes waiting to be chopped up in the scrap metal. But, now there are only 8 of those planes left flying in the world.
Alan, tell us about your planes that you flew, if they had any names or nose art.
Yeah, I was fortunate. My plane I used most of the time, unless it was in for repairs. And it was named Lady Jane after my wife, and number 27. Good airplane. I get a kick out of these guys' stories, and I like to kid them, but by the time they got over there, they were using our relics that we'd already been through.
I was still in college when they went over.
Well, the P47 has certainly a history and a legendary for its ruggedness and also its size and weight. What was your experience? How would you describe the P47 as you flew it in combat?
Well, the higher you got, the better it flew. It was really built to work at around 30,000 feet, as I recall. We rarely got over 10,000 because instead of escorting bombers, we became dive bombers. They put a bomb rack under the wingtips and hung a 500-pound bomb there and put a belly tank or a tank full of napalm underneath the wheels, between the wheels. And it was easy to fly. If you trimmed it up, you could fly it hands off if it wasn't all twisted up from being fixed. The only thing is, when they used to tell how fast it would go, I seemed like I couldn't get it up to that speed, 400 and something, unless you dive first. You could dive and pick it, and there was no plane that would outdive it. If you were chasing somebody and he went over, and I saw this happen once, all of us were strung out chasing a German plane, and he kept, every once in a while he'd go around like that and look back. And when we got pretty far up, I don't know how high we were, he decided the guy we were catching him. And so he just rolled over and started into a dive, and that was the end of him. The first man that went after him, he almost passed him up before he shot him down.
Raymond, what is your experience, and what would you have to say about the P47 Thunderbolt?
Well, as Jerry said, diving was its strength. And it could take a lot of punishment. I've seen the P47 come back with one cylinder shot completely out, and the connecting rod dangling around in the air, and that plane still flew back 100 miles to get the pilot home safely. And one of my experiences, we were bombing a marshalling yard. I picked out a locomotive and got my bombs on it, and I went a little bit low, which I quite often did. And as I was pulling out, I felt this terrible, sickening thud, and I called into the flight leader that had been hit. He says, "Did you go too low?" Meekly, "I don't think so, sir." He said, "I think you did. You took it to base." And my wingman said, "Shall I go with him?" There's always the custom to have two planes together. Didn't want, for safety's sake, he didn't want one plane alone. Very coldly, he said, "No, we can go alone." And when I got back to the field, they said the field is closed to all traffic except the C-47s. They were bringing in gas for the war machine to run on for tanks and planes alike. As far as you could see, those C-47s were coming in as 5-gallon jerry cans. And that's, our army was advancing so fast at that time, they couldn't get gas to them in any other way. Finally, they said, there's going to be about a 30-second opening. If you can squeeze in there, well, you can land. And so I did get to land, but I thought that was an interesting experience. It was a tough plane. Oh, and I forgot about part of that debriefing. I had my commanding officer let me know what he thought of me again. And he said, the next guy that pulls a dumb stunt like that gets court-martialed. And 2 days later, a fellow came back trailing about 100 feet of telephone wire. And sure enough, he was court-martialed. I had my commanding officer and that fellow both mad at me. And that piece that was in my plane that struck me was a piece of locomotive about the size of the palm of your hand. And the mechanic came in to hand it to me at the debriefing. He says, "What are those cops shooting at you guys now?"
Alan, what's your comments and experience with the characteristics of a P-47?
Beautiful airplane, took a beating. When strafing, sometimes you get concentrated on this target, and you might get a bit lower than you want it to be. I've seen at least 2 planes come back that went through the trees. They got too low, and when they pulled out, it went right to the tops of the trees. And it was wood stashed in, mushed in around all the cylinders in front. Of course, all the instruments were in the red line beyond, but they came back. It's a good airplane.
Jerry, if you could briefly walk us through what's a typical day on a mission in Europe.
Well, you could eat breakfast if you wanted to, and then go in and whoever was briefing you would tell you what the target was for the day and whether they anticipated heavy flak or light flak or no flak. And they give you the heading out and the heading back. And of course you had your couple of 500-pound bombs. Sometimes you had little, I forgot what they call those little bombs they'd wrap around the big bomb, the anti-personnel bombs. And so you take off, you fly up 7,000 or 8,000 feet, fly over. Once you cross into Germany, the flak would start coming up. And we didn't run into many German planes. We did run into them, and some were, I never shot any down. I shot at 2 of them, a couple of jets, but I missed. And you would dive bomb the target, and sometimes you'd have to call a ground controller if you couldn't see the target, and they would have the artillery fellow down there with the infantry company you'd call him, and he could call the artillery, and they'd drop smoke on the target. It's a shell, you know. So they'd say red smoke is on the way, and pretty soon the red smoke would hit. And about 20 seconds later, red smoke hit all over our side because the Germans would shoot the smoke back. They finally got around to saying smoke is on the way. And then when it hit, they'd say red splashed or blue, so they didn't have time. You know, you could see it before you saw a bunch of others. And the worst thing was, we circled a bridge down on the Rhine River one time, and there was snow on the ground, and all they had was white smoke. They circled it for a long time. I don't remember how long. But finally, flight leader rolled over like that to start his dive bomb run. And boy, the whole sky, he rolled back out and we went somewhere else.
Raymond, tell us the scariest mission that you were on.
They were all pretty scary. I can't pick one out. Getting ready for takeoff, the flight crew was tremendous. You had a mechanic on either side of you got into the plane. They buckled you in, hooked up your wires and tubes and such, and did everything that you were supposed to taught to do in training. There was nothing to do except drive out to the end of the runway and push the throttle forward. So I thought they were tremendous, but taxiing out to the end of the runway, my knees were always chattering. There's no figure speech. They were really knocking, but and that's the scary part of it. Sorry I couldn't tell you more.
Alan, tell us one of the most memorable missions that you went on.
Well, I guess one of the most memorable ones had a good effect and a bad effect. We were up in the northern part of Italy, and we were getting hit with flak pretty bad. I'd spotted where some of this firepower was coming from. It was right at the base of a big white building. So I called our squad leader and I said, I've got it spotted. I'm going down with my flight and get rid of it. And about that time, one of the other leaders came in and said, Sandy, I don't think I'd do that. I think that's the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
So you've all heard of the monument bed. Thanks to Alan, we saved the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Well, I tell you, we could be here all night and hear these incredible stories and the times they spent, their camaraderie, and what they did for us, future generations. I would like to open it up for a few minutes from the audience if you'd like to ask questions.
Thanks for sharing this with us. Hey, how many seconds of armament machine gun ammo did you have? Because you just couldn't lay into the gun and expect it to last forever.
Well, you didn't hold your trigger down. You give them little sparks and sparks and sparks. I think we had 2,200 rounds of ammo. Does that sound about right?
We carried 2,400 in ours.
We carried 2 armor piercing, 2 incendiary, and 2 tracers. And I think if you held the trigger down, you'd be out of ammo in no minute or 2 seconds. Yeah.
You'd be out of ammo and you'd burned out your gun barrels.
You're right.
too.
Yeah.
About a 3-second burst was the most you could fire, and then we had 2,400 rounds, which would last just about 20 seconds. I have seen guns that were burned completely to the point where they weren't used, or could not be used because the pilot had gotten excited and held the trigger too long. When that happens, you can see those tracers just spinning out of control, going in pretty patterns. They weren't going in a straight line. In our guns, we had 4 different rounds, tracers, general purpose, incendiary, and armor piercing. And towards the end of the war, we did get explosives. But that meant that for every tracer that you saw flying out there were 9 other bullets going. So they had a terrific force. Later on after the war, I read where these 8 guns had the power of a 5-ton truck going 60 miles an hour. That's the impact they made. And I've talked to infantrymen who have been on the ground watching us fire. They said the front end, the leading edge of the wing looked like it was on fire. We were firing those 8 guns at once.
Next question, please.
I appreciate your service, man. Thank you very much. What was the P47's handling characteristics in combat? Did it turn as well as an ME-109? Did it roll? How were its characteristics as compared to who you were up against?
Well, your turn, you'd be okay turning. It would hold its own. You couldn't climb as fast as the Mustang or the P51. You probably couldn't. I know you couldn't outclimb an ME-109, but if you ever got in trouble, all you had to do was get in a dive. If you got in a dive, nobody could catch you.
What was your red line?
This plane weighed roughly between 7 and 10 tons, depending on how much armament you had on. So when you turned it over and went down, it was like a rock.
What was your red line on it?
I've seen it a couple of times, but I can't remember.
Is it 550?
About 550, I think. But if you're in something else, somebody asked about the capacity for the machine gun zone. 20 seconds, it doesn't seem like any time at all, I know. But when you're going 250, 300 miles an hour in a dive, and you've got 850 caliber machines out there, that's a lot of firepower going out. And if you shoot it only in 5-second bursts, that's a lot. Remember, those 50 calibers are about that long, about that big around, so just think how much construction you can have.
Next question.
I'm just curious that even though it's been nearly 70 years for you guys flying, if you'd still feel like you'd be able to do it, if you'd have the muscle memory and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't even start it. But I feel like I could. I feel like I could. I don't know if I could or not. But I feel that I could.
I'm doubtful.
Maybe I'm optimistic, but I believe I'd take a crack at it.
This question's for Raymond. You said you left a plane on a hillside in Germany. That sounds like more to the story. Can you enlighten us on that?
It's a long story. What a good one.
Rich, I'd like to know what they did with flying after they got out of the service. Did you do any civilian flying afterwards? If so, what did you fly?
The question was flying after the service, what did they do? Was it civilian or military?
Well, I flew in the reserve for 8 years. I signed up for 5 years. But when 5 years came, a letter came saying there's a Korean conflict. We're still in the reserve. Fortunately, I didn't get called back. I had 2 children by then, but I know quite a few fellows that did get called, and most of them were made instructors, the ones that I knew.
I bought a little Luscombe to fly, just recreational. I still love to fly.
And still does today.
Wow.
Good.
Well, I stayed in reserve for about 2 years after I got out of the normal service, and we probably stayed in for good, but the company decided to transfer me to Evansville, Indiana, and there went to reserve.
Yeah, did you guys fly very much bomber escort on your missions? Or was it mostly ground support?
I had 2 bomber. Well, really, I only had 1 bomber escort mission out of my 66, and it was some B-25s. And before we got to the target, we pulled ahead of them and dive bombed the anti-aircraft positions. And the other mission I had, it was similar to, it wasn't exactly a bomber escort, but toward the end of the war, the British bombers came out one day in broad daylight and were going to Mannheim, Germany. And they had fighter planes from all over everywhere around over Mannheim to protect them. But they couldn't protect them all, because I remember them looking around like this, and I looked back over here and this big Lancaster bomber was pieces of it flying all over the sky, because they were shooting them down.
I only remember 3 escort missions, and they were the smaller bombers, and all the flights were uneventful.
While we were stationed on Corsica, we had 2 B-24 missions that we were supposed to escort. One was canceled about halfway to the target, and the other one we flew it all Italy with it, and then another escort squadron took over from there.
This first mission we had, there wasn't a dive bombing and strafing. We escorted some B-26s. That's the one where we pulled ahead and dive bombed and strafed the gun positions. But I remember when they briefed us they told us that when the flak starts coming up, you stay right there beside those planes. Everybody said, All those fighters, we were on each side. We went this way and the other ones went that way. It's almost, unless you're ordered to absolutely stay there, you can't do it. At least I couldn't. Nobody in our outfit did.
I'm curious what base you were flying out of in northern Italy.
We didn't go, we flew into northern Italy out of Corsica.
Oh, you were flying out of Corsica?
Yes.
But you never had any bases in Italy, in northern Italy?
What was your air base?
Oh, about halfway up, I guess about halfway up, we had an air base up there. And then we moved to Corsica. And then about the time I came home, we moved back to Italy.
I see. Thank you.
We were about halfway up the country. And when these two men came over, of course, Italy was about shot as far as the war was concerned. Everything was in France and Germany.
All the Germans were heading for Brenner Pass, right?
I know that General Mitchell had been pushing for some time for the buildup of the Air Force, and it wasn't happening. And Rickenbacker, Lindenberg were telling that Goring was building up a huge German Air Force at the time, and we were kind of late in getting into that with the Air Force. Did you know at the time what role you were playing in this? What part of history you were going to become?
Well, I don't think I knew. I knew all about Rickenbacker, and I knew that Lindbergh got in trouble by saying that they had an Air Force and nobody else did to compete with them. Plus, Germany got a lot of practice in Spain. By the way, those German pilots wouldn't do 100 missions and go home. They'd do 300 or 400 or 500 missions, some of them, and they finally ran out of pilots and planes. I mean, they ran out of seasoned pilots. They had fellas that maybe had 20 or 30 hours of flying time. And I don't know if we knew that or not.
Did you want to make a comment? All right.
What was the range of the planes? How long could they stay up in the air? And did you ever run close to running out of fuel?
Well, one time I was at the longest mission I had was 4 hours. We did have to land at Kassel, Germany, which had been taken to gas up. But that running out of fuel, depending on if you had that throttle wide open or not, you could probably stay up 5 hours anyway, I believe. But if you had to open that throttle all the way, I don't imagine you could stay up over an hour or two. I'm not sure. Maybe one of them could tell you. But I think it carried 400 gallon. You could carry a 110-gallon wing tank, a belly tank. And you could carry 3 tanks. You could carry one under each wing and one on the belly.
Do you want to comment on range?
That 5 or 6 hours is with wing tanks. Without any tanks, you would be able to get about maybe 3 hours. You're pushing it.
I'm kind of the next generation after you're flying. Did you have a call sign when in your communications with others? Do you remember what your call sign was?
Our call sign was discharge.
I don't remember any of our call signs, but some of the ground controllers were boxcar. You ever hear them? Hello, boxcar, give me a steer, get me home. Boxcar, rabbi was one of them. That's about the only 2 I remember.
Richard, I'd like to make one comment. As I was a young boy at the time when they were building the P47s here at Serville, and out at the airfield, they had tents scattered as far as the eye could see, and I remember one of them crashing on the railroad right across next to 41 there, and so P47 has always been interesting to me, and I'm appreciative of what you're doing there.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming here tonight.